So it may seem as if what I have described so far in this series about higher awareness psychology is somewhat abstract, somewhat impractical, like what exactly am I going to do with it? So in this video we're going to get down to more of the practical aspects, not so much what you can do at this point, but we're going to talk about the one thing that really is the key to changing your life, to changing your life experience, to changing your psychology. And if you understand this one thing, everything will shift in the sense that you will see a different way to look at the human psyche that you were brought up with. And it's simply you could call it a secret about the human psychology, but it's unfortunately only a secret because the science of psychology, they haven't discovered it. And why they haven't discovered it, we don't need to go into here. We can just say, you haven't been told about it because hardly anybody understands this. So, in order to explain this, let's start with what I've talked about before, about energy and the 4 levels of the mind. So I've said, from a higher level, there is a stream of energy that flows into your mind. And it flows into the identity level where it takes on a certain coloring, certain matrix, a certain form. Then it flows into the mental where it takes on a more concrete form. Then it flows into the emotional where it takes on the emotional energy. And emotional energy can really be said to be sort of an impulse, a direction, impulse to act. And then it flows into physical actions. So, what is it that's happening in this process? Well, the first thing to understand is that we are self-aware beings. I had in one of the first videos, I had you go through the exercise where instead of just watching the video, you become aware, hey, I'm sitting here watching the video. You can mentally step outside your body, outside the room, outside the building, and so forth. What gives you the ability to do this is self-awareness. Instead of just being absorbed in some activity, you can become self-aware. And why is that important? Because now you can ask yourself the question, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I reacting the way I'm reacting? Is there a different way to react? Could I change my reactions? Could I change my actions? Could I change the way I feel about life? So this is self-awareness. But it's important for another reason also, and that is that what is it? What is self-awareness? Well, it's consciousness. You are conscious. And why is that important? Well, I said in a previous video that everything in the world is created out of energy, and everything we do is done with energy. So as I said, there's a stream of energy. The only reason you can take a physical action is there's a stream of energy that flows into your mind. Identity, mental, emotional, and then into the physical. But energy, so we could say, energy has created the world. Everything is created out of energy. But energy hasn't by itself created the world. It's not that energy is something that just spontaneously organizes itself. This is what scientific materialism wants you to believe, that there are these smallest particles in the world and they spontaneously organize themselves into all this complexity we see. If you had believed this, you wouldn't be watching this. So what is it that causes energy to take on the form of matter and take on the particular form it takes on? Well, it's consciousness. Because there's a matrix, a thought form in consciousness. And it's only because we're conscious that we can actually formulate such a thought form. The problem is, we also formulate thought forms without being consciously aware of what we're doing. So, this is why I talk about reactionary patterns. Let's say I'm telling you to take this and draw a picture on it. Right? You have a blank white page and you have a pen and now you're supposed to draw something. Well, before you can draw something, you have to decide, what am I going to draw? That's being conscious of you being able to choose. But then I've also talked about that we have situations where we are exposed to trauma. All of a sudden, something happens that we didn't expect, and now we have a split second to react. And in many of these situations, We react by using our consciousness, but we're not aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So this is basically what I've said. We have reactionary patterns in our subconscious mind. So you have a reactionary pattern that causes you to respond with anger in certain situations. So there's an outer situation that acts like a trigger, and now it triggers this subconscious structure. And you are reacting with anger without making a conscious decision to do so. And the key, of course, to changing your reactionary patterns is to use your conscious awareness, your self-awareness, to step back and say, oh, I observe that in certain situations I'm always responding with anger or reacting with anger. Why? And the why is what we're going to talk about here. So let's use an example. Let's say you want to build a house. So here you have a flat piece of ground. There's nothing on it. A couple of bushes, some weeds. There's absolutely nothing when you look at this piece of land that indicates that there could be a house there. Nothing. It just isn't there, right? So here you are. Maybe you're using an architect or an engineer or a building firm. But anyway, you're standing there, and what's the first thing you have to do? Well, the first thing is to make the decision you're going to build a house. And where do you make that decision? Actually, at the identity level of your mind. That's the highest level of the mind, and that's where you decide, I'm going to build a house. Then the next thing is, what kind of a house is it going to be? For example, 1 stories or 2 stories? What style should it be? And how big and how expensive and this and that. So these are the overall decisions. But what are you actually doing? Let's say you're standing there in front of this flat piece of land. There's nothing on it. And what you're doing is you're using your self-awareness, your consciousness, to formulate an image, a matrix at the identity level. There's going to be a house on this empty lot. And what we could say is that in essence, you are creating an image of the house. It's invisible at this point, but you're creating a matrix, an energetic matrix of the house. And as I said, the mind has 4 levels, but the material universe also has 4 levels. So really, you are in actuality creating an energetic structure made of the energies of the identity realm, of the outline of the house. Now you go to the mental level. And here's where you have an architect or an engineer draw up the exact plans. Exactly how is the house going to be built, what kind of materials, what kind of windows and doors, and what kind of rooms, and all this stuff. So this is at the mental level. Now you may draw some physical plans, but you could also say that at that empty lot, empty space there, you are taking the matrix you created at the identity level, making it more concrete at the mental level. So now in the mental realm, there is a more concrete, energetic structure of the house. Right? Then after that, you go to the emotional level. And this is where you then take the action to implement it. You sign the contract, you sign with the bank, you say, go ahead, start building. And you may then take whatever actions you need to take in order to help this process along, and the other people do this. So what I'm saying is, first you create an energetic matrix at the identity level of the empty lot of the house. You make that more concrete at the mental level, and then you put it into motion. Energy, emotion is energy in motion. You could say, if you only have the blueprint, the architect's blueprints, you can draw any kind of blueprint, you can change it, you can do whatever you want, or you can do nothing with it. And if the blueprint sits at the architect's office, well, nothing further is going to happen. So you have to set the energetic matrix in motion in order to start the physical building process. So what is the process of building a house? It is that you first create an energetic matrix at the identity, mental, emotional level. And then you, or the builders, contractors, they are filling in that energetic matrix at the physical level. You see what I'm trying to say here? If you take scientific materialism of how the world was created, with spontaneously all these elementary particles started organizing themselves into planets and solar systems and houses and mountains, this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there is an energetic matrix, and the builders are not randomly stacking bricks. They are filling in that energetic matrix at the 3 higher levels at the physical level. So first comes the energetic matrix, then comes the physical actions, and that is a very big step when you understand this towards taking command over your psychology. Because now you can say, okay, I saw that I took this physical action. I didn't really want to, I didn't really think about the consequences, but I had a sense that it wasn't going to be good, but I couldn't stop myself. I took the physical action. I shouldn't have done this. I wish I hadn't done this. Perhaps you've never been in that situation, but some of us have. So, why did you take that action? If you use conditional psychology, they'll say, well, it just all happened at the physical level, your physical brain. But it didn't. It started at your identity mind, then there was something in the mental mind, and then the emotional mind. The outer situation triggered this structure in the 3 higher levels of the mind. And they took over your physical actions. You didn't make a conscious decision to do what you did. And the key to changing your life is to stop doing what you do without making conscious decisions, but taking back your power to make a conscious choice about how you react to certain situations. That's the key to changing your life right there. So how do you do this? Well, this is where we have to realize what is actually happening. So I use the illustration. You're creating an energetic matrix at the identity level for the house you want to build, making it more concrete in the mental level and giving it emotion, setting it in motion at the emotional level. So, in a previous video, I talked about you're learning to ride a bicycle. You're basically creating a subconscious program for how to ride a bicycle. But I also talked about how there are certain situations that are not mechanical things, physical things. They are psychological things, how you react to a situation. So I used the example before, so let's just take that. When you were 5 years old, you were bullied by an older child. You experienced you couldn't physically defend yourself, the oldest child was stronger, you couldn't get away, so you had to deal with the situation. At the identity level, how did that affect you? Well, this is just an example, it could be individual, but many people, when we're exposed to these kind of situations, we make a decision without realizing it. I'm powerless. I'm powerless. Can't do anything about this. I can't run away, I can't resist. It's the fight or flight syndrome. I can neither flee nor fight. I'm powerless. This is a decision at the identity level. Then at the mental level, you make further decisions. What you can do, what you can't do. How can you react to this? You can only react by submitting, you think. This is again just an example. So you think, I can only submit and try to avoid it and try to pretend like it doesn't affect me. But this gives you a frustration because obviously it's an unpleasant situation. You can't stop it, you can't get away from it. So it puts you in a bind mentally. You feel you should be able to do something about it, but you can't see it. So again, the frustration might make you decide that in such situations, it's okay to be angry. Or you might decide, the only way to react is to be angry. And this then goes into the emotional level where now there's part of this program you created that says, the only way to react is anger. I can only be angry. So now, every time you encounter a situation like that, like I said, you're 30 years old now, you get a new job, somebody's bullying you, and it triggers the program that created you were 5. So therefore, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, you're now reacting as a 5-year-old, even you're way into adulthood. So obviously this isn't constructive, right? But what have you done? I've talked about a computer program. But you see, a computer program is just a program. Contrary to what some people want you to believe with artificial intelligence and this and that, a computer program is not self-aware. It's programmed to do certain things, right? And when you push a certain button on the screen, the word processor opens up. It can't do anything else. It can't decide, oh, I don't feel like it today, I'm not going to open up. Or if you start writing, it can't decide, oh, I don't like what he's writing, I'm going to change it. Well, the spell checker sometimes does that for you, but nevertheless. So, what I'm saying is, a computer program is unconscious. But how do you create this program in your subconscious mind? You create it with your consciousness. Take care now. You may not be conscious of what you're doing, but you're still using your consciousness. And that means what? It means as you are creating this structure at the identity, mental, and emotional level, you are endowing it, imbuing it with some of your consciousness. This means you're not just creating a completely unconscious computer program. You're creating an entity, a kind of being that has some consciousness. Now, this is where it gets tricky. I said you are self-aware, at least you have the potential to be self-aware. But this entity you're creating is not self-aware. What I'll do from now on, I'll call this subconscious program, subconscious structure, subconscious entity, I'll call it a self, a subconscious self. Because it has a rudimentary state of consciousness. Now again, what does that mean? That means it's conscious. It's not really conscious that it's alive, but it is aware of some form of existence, and that it only survives because it gets energy from you. Remember what I said? You are conscious because your mind is receiving a stream of energy from a higher level that flows into your mind. And you're using some of that energy to create this self. So the self has this consciousness that it only exists because you created it. It also has a certain drive to survive, and it has a drive to become stronger. And that means that the self is aware. Let's say again, you were bullied when you were 5, you created this self. I'm powerless, I can only be angry when I'm exposed to these situations. So this self has a certain awareness that it only exists because you feed it energy, and it only becomes stronger when you feed it more energy. Now, the subconscious self is not self-aware. It can't step back and say, why am I doing this? Do I really want to be doing this? Do I really want to be angry? No, I don't want to be angry. I'm going to laugh instead. It can't do that. So whenever a situation triggers the self, it responds a certain way. But it knows that it only can survive and become stronger when you give it energy. And how do you give it energy? When you become angry. This means 2 things. This self, well, what can we compare it to? It's like you have created a being, a self in your subconscious mind that has a certain aliveness, and it can only stay alive, it can only become stronger by influencing you. Now, where does the self reside? It resides in your identity, mental, and emotional level. It's created at all three levels. What does that mean? Well, it means it's somewhat integrated with your identity, mental, and emotional minds, meaning it can affect you. It can pull on your mind. Most obvious example is it can pull your emotions into anger. It can pull you into thinking a certain way. It can pull you into identifying yourself a certain way. I'm powerless. So this means two things, as I said, as I started to say. The self wants you to become angry. It wants you to become angry more and more often. So in other words, it wants you to engage more and more often in the whole matrix of identity, thoughts, emotions, and actions that created the self. So this is one thing. It wants you to keep doing what created the self, and it wants you to do it more and more. The other thing is, if you try to dissolve the self, it'll resist you. Talked about a little bit about this before, but now we can see it more clearly. It's almost like a being, a little gnome inside of you that says, he's watching this video. I'm going to resist it. I don't want him to watch this video, or her. So, what does it do? It projects thoughts at the identity level, the mental level, and it projects feelings into the emotional. So now you can say, can you give me any proof of this? Well, I can't give you a physical proof, right? Because this self exists at the higher levels of vibration, the emotional, mental, and identity level. I think science can actually measure this. They can probably even display it on a computer screen, but they haven't really developed that. So I can't give you a physical proof, but do I need to? Can't you just become aware, tune in to what's happening in your mind as I'm saying this? Can you feel a certain resistance? Can you become aware that you have situations where all of a sudden it's like you are flooded with certain emotions? You're overwhelmed by emotions, whether it's anger or shame or guilt or whatever. Where do they come from? Well, they come from one of these selves. They can also come from outside, as I talked about in a previous video, but a lot of times they come from a self. Then can you not remember having situations where you are flooded with all these thoughts? You have a certain situation, things don't go as you want, or you think you made a mistake, and all of a sudden you have this obsessive compulsive need to go over the situation again and again and again. What projects these thoughts into your mental mind? The self. The self. And then at the identity level, can you remember situations where you had this thought, oh, I'm powerless, I'm no good, I can't do this, I'm not worthy to have money, or whatever it is. Nobody loves me. All of these thoughts, where do they come from? Well, they can come from the outside, but a lot of the times they come from these cells you have. And so what happens is, as I'm telling you this, you now have an awareness you didn't have before. You have an awareness that you have these selves that are hiding in the subconscious mind. That means you can start looking for them, right? But what is it that these selves want, first of all? They want to survive. And they know they can only survive if you give them energy, and you will only give them energy if you don't know them, that they exist, or if you don't see them, if you don't see a specific self. So they'll do everything they can to stay hidden, everything they can to prevent you from seeing them. They also know that if you really look, you could decide to dismiss the self. What did I say with the self? You were bullied, you decided I'm powerless. That was a decision you made. And it was not an unreasonable decision when you were 5 years old, because in a certain sense you were powerless. You weren't really, but it's understandable as a 5-year-old that we react the way we did and feel powerless. But now you are an adult. You are no longer powerless. So why should your reactions to life be bound by the decision you made when you were 5 years old? But they will be bound because you don't realize you created the self, and you don't realize what decision it was based on. So you can't see that your reactions are based on an illusion. But once you start looking at the self and you see the illusion and you realize, hey, I'm an adult now, I'm not powerless, then you can dismiss the self. You can also learn, which we will teach you in higher awareness psychology, how to dissolve the energy that makes up the self that's pulling on your emotions and your thoughts. So in other words, once you become aware of the illusion, that the self is based on an illusion, you can dissolve the self. The self doesn't really understand this because it doesn't understand it's based on an illusion, but it still feels threatened by you becoming aware of it. It knows somehow that it wants to stay hidden from you. And that's why I'm saying the big secret to changing your psychology is, number one, to realize that you have these subconscious selves. Number two, to realize they will resist you making them conscious. And number three, there is absolutely no self that you can't change. Why is that? Well, because every self is based on a decision. And you have the ability to change any decision you made in the past. Now, I know that you might have been brought up to believe, because most of us were brainwashed with this idea that there are certain decisions we can make we can never change. And yes, you could say, if you made a decision that had physical consequences, you can't change the physical consequences. But what I'm talking about here is a structure in your mind. And any structure in the mind you can change. And that's the whole idea of higher awareness psychology, changing your life experience. How do you change your life experience? By changing the structures in your mind, the selves. So, here you were, 5 years old. You had a certain limited vision of a situation. You could only see certain options. And based on this limited vision, which is an illusion, you created the self. I'm powerless. A powerless self. Now you're an adult. You have the ability. Go through your mind. Come to see the illusion that the self was based on. And then consciously make a decision to dismiss the illusion and accept a higher awareness that you are not a powerless being. You have options. Now this requires a process, because many times when we, as I've said before, you start looking into the subconscious mind, the first thing you encounter is this turbulent emotional energy that seeks to pull you hither and yon, because the selves will flood you with energy to prevent you from looking at them. So that many people, as I said, they just encounter the emotional energy, they get scared, and they say, oh, so I'm never looking into my subconscious mind again. But HAP will teach you a systematic procedure for diminishing that energy so it doesn't have that chaotic effect on you. Then you need to look at the mental level, and there can be some confusing arguments there. And we'll talk more about this, but one of the things you need to realize about the mental level is it's based on the rational mind, right? And a rational mind has a very little known feature. Just look at the world and look at how you have these people who have these intellectual discussions where one side will take one position and it'll come up with arguments. Just as an example, for hundreds of years philosophers have been arguing, does God exist or does God not exist? So you have one side that says God exists, and they come up with all kinds of rational arguments for why. Then you have another side that says God doesn't exist, and they come up with rational arguments why not. Those who believe God doesn't exist, they think their arguments make perfect sense and they're convincing. But they're obviously not convincing the other side because they think their arguments are the best. So what I'm saying is, the intellectual mind has an ability to argue for or against any point without coming up with anything decisive. So you have to learn when you start looking at the self, you have to identify what are the beliefs based on. But you have to not go into arguing, reasoning with a self. Instead, you use your intuition. And we'll talk more about that, of course. But you use your intuition to look for a higher vision than what the mental aspect of the self is presenting to you. And that then takes you to the identity level where you can look at the illusion that the self is based on. So in other words, the powerless self, at the mental level, it will come up with all kinds of arguments for why you are powerless and why you can't do anything about it, why you can't overcome being powerless. But when you go beyond that with the intuition, you can come to the identity level where you see it was just a decision you made based on the way you looked at the situation back then. And now that you have a higher awareness of yourself and of life, you can change that decision. Why should you be bound by it? You can accept, I'm not powerless, I have power, I can do this. I don't have to become angry when I'm bullied. And this, once you realize this is extremely powerful. I mean, there's really nothing you can't change in your life when you realize this, if you're really willing to look into your subconscious mind. Now, I have to say here, I have all along in these videos, I've tried to avoid this sensationalist thing you see so much out there on the internet where we have the secret to changing your life in 5 seconds. HAP is a gradual path. It will take time. You have many of these selves. They're created over a long period of time. So it will take time. It will take effort to overcome them. But once you get started on the process, once you take one self that you feel is really limiting you, and you use the process to completely dissolve that self, so you're not affected by it anymore. Once you experience that, you will realize, hey, this is really powerful stuff. How far can I go with this? And I'm telling you, there is no limit other than your own willingness to continue looking into your subconscious mind and identifying these selves you have. And then, of course, using the process will teach you to break through the resistance of the self until you see that basic illusion and you consciously dismiss it and accept a higher reality. So it's really, I mean, to be honest with you, I've been on the spiritual path, or the path of self-transcendence, whatever you want to call it, for 48 years. And for the first many years, 25, maybe 30 years, I didn't have this teaching about the subconscious selves. And when I got it, it just became so much easier. It's not that I hadn't made progress before, but it became so much easier to identify the problem, to identify the pattern, to identify the self and dismiss it. And I think you will find the same thing if you really apply it. So I hope you will continue watching and let me take you through the next steps on this process.